Imagine a civilization that thrives for centuries, stone cities rising from the jungle, a calendar that catches the stars, power measured in pyramids and plazas. And then, silence. In a single lifetime, maybe a season, the drums fade, streets go empty, and the jungle breathes in. What if everything they built suddenly ceased to matter? What if the question isn't where the Maya went, but why the cities fell? They did not vanish. The cities did. Languages endured. Traditions endured. People endured. So the mystery is not disappearance, it is failure. Why did a brilliant system break? Across the lowland forests, stone pyramids rose like mountains, shaped by human hands. Kings timed festivals to the sky. Scribes pressed time into living rock. Maize fed the masses. Reservoirs trapped the rains. Causeways stitched city to city like bright threads over a green sea. Glory had a price. Forests cut for fields, trees burned for lime to skin palaces in shining plaster. Populations swelled, rivalries sharpened. Every monument was power on display and a debt charged to the land. Then the balance shifted. Rains faltered, soils tired, wars flared. Elites demanded more when the earth could give less. Trades sputtered, households moved. Dates stopped being carved. Plazas went quiet. This was not a single blow. It was many arriving together. A perfect storm that silenced the cities, while the Maya themselves lived on. Before the plazas fell quiet, the classic Maya world blazed with life. Across the lowland jungles of today's Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, city-states rose like islands of stone. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, names carved into limestone and memory, were linked by roads, rivers, and rival dynasties. Power was ritual made visible. Rulers bound their blood and thrones to the movements of Venus and the sun. Temples faced the heavens. Stairways staged the ascent of human bodies into divine stories. When a king appeared in full regalia, people saw the skywalk. Legitimacy lived not only in armies, but in correct rites and the promise that the universe still recognized the crown. Food and water fueled the splendor. Maize anchored the diet, partnered with beans and squash. Rainfall was seasonal, generous some years, stingy in others. To turn uncertainty into life, the Maya built systems. Terraces along hill slopes, reservoirs like small lakes, channels that guided wet-season torrents into storage. In the porous limestones of the north, households carved bottle-shaped cisterns, chultans, to keep water through the dry months. In the southern lowlands, cities ringed plazas with reservoirs and canals. It worked until it didn't. What made the cities brilliant also made them vulnerable. Forests fed kilns that burned limestone into the plaster that gleamed on palaces and courtyards. Each coat of lime cost trees. Each monument demanded more labor, more food, more wood. Populations that grew under good rains had to be fed when the clouds thinned. Even success became a debt charged to future seasons. Trade stitched the region together, carrying obsidian from volcanic highlands, shells and salt from the coasts, and rumors from every market. Victories were etched on stone and read aloud because memory itself was a road that bound the living to the throne. Time felt like architecture. The long count dated events across centuries. Shorter cycles paced rituals and politics. When a king dedicated a monument on the right day, he tuned society like an instrument. When rain came as expected, the notes rang true. But underneath the rhythm, the land kept score. Hills thinned, where slopes were farmed too hard, soils washed into bajos, seasonally flooded depressions, where fields had been pushed in ambitious years, woodlands retreated from urban centers, game grew scarce near large capitals. Each generation inherited a landscape more carefully managed and more easily unsettled. The first hints of trouble did not look like doom. A late rain, a poor harvest, a rival seizing a border town, a king raising a larger temple to answer doubts and persuade the sky. Families tightened belts and worked longer in fields. Craftsmen shifted from carving histories to repairing walls. The system flexed. And because it flexed, people believed it could not break. Courts were not blind. They dug new reservoirs, opened fields, forged alliances. Yet power concentrates pressure. The more a dynasty had to perform prosperity, the more it spent on symbols to convince the public. Monument programs often accelerated during stress because spectacle is most needed when confidence trembles. Inside palaces, scribes watched omens. Outside walls, farmers watched the sky itself. A dry year can be survived with stores and favors. 2 dry years demand loans and promises. 3 make promises look like lies. Those who could moved, first to better soils at the city's edge, then along rivers, then to towns where rainfall patterns differed. Migration begins as prudence long before it looks like collapse. Picture a household at the threshold of decision. Fields yield less. Work gangs pull them away for projects that buy honor for a king, but not bread for children. The reservoir is lower each season. The market carries less salt, fewer fish, more rumors. The choice to leave is not surrender, it is strategy. For elites, strategy looked different. Rival kings sensed weakness. Fortifications rose on ridges, ambushes cut roads that once carried trade. Victories were carved with pride, but each triumph paid out in more mouths to feed, more captives to keep, more rituals to stage. Warfare under stress is a fire that consumes the wood you still need for winter. And still, culture flowered. Scholars refined astronomy. Artists set stone masks upon pyramid faces. As strain gathered, creativity did not stop. Systems fail gracefully at first, with enough beauty to resemble stability from a distance. The classic Maya were never a single empire, and that mattered. Decentralization created resilience by diversity, yet it also meant no authority could order a region-wide response when climate pressed hard. One city built new reservoirs, another doubled down on monuments, a third gambled on conquest. Coordination failed not because leaders were foolish, but because the map rewarded local success over shared planning. When the sky turned unreliable, the ledger that balanced for centuries went red. Paleoclimate records, preserved later in lakes and caves, revealed droughts clustering in the late 8th and 9th centuries. To the people living it, there were no charts, only seasons that betrayed memory. One thin year empties stores, the next empties trust. Doubts crept through palaces. If the king's blood and rights kept the world in order, what did it mean when the world went wrong? Courts answered with bigger festivals, deeper sacrifices, and claims on stone. The tired shrugged.
The hungry left.
Across the southern lowlands, the signal arrives in slow motion on the archaeological record. Construction speeds up, then halts. Dates cluster, then stop. Potsherds thin. Rural hamlets empty before capitals do, because ordinary people are early navigators when a system grows brittle. The great plazas stand last, not because they are strong, but because they are symbols. Rulers cannot abandon until the very end. And yet, this is not a tale of ashes. To the north, rainfall rhythms differed, coastlines offered salt and fish, and new centers rose. Traditions traveled with people, languages endured, gods accepted worship under new roofs. The city is not the civilization. It is a stage where civilization performs until it changes costume. Chapter 1 ends where silence begins, on stones that stopped receiving dates, on reservoirs that held mirrors of empty skies, on roads where footsteps turned away from old capitals. What fell was not a people, but a pattern. Next, we follow the clues: climate, conflict, environment, and the choices of elites, to see how small pressures became one great silence. For now, remember the streets before they emptied, the calendars before they paused, the faith before it frayed. A system that dazzled the world did not fall in a single night. It walked there, step by step, believing it was still dancing. Chapter 2. Unpacking the puzzle, the leading theories. The stones go quiet, and we start listening to other witnesses. Lakes, caves, charcoal in soils, broken walls. Each keeps a fragment of the story. None speaks loudly enough alone. Together, they begin to sound like truth. First, the sky itself, told by water. Paleoclimate records, sealed inside stalagmites and lake beds, preserve the chemistry of past rains. Layer by layer, year by year, the cave drip lays down a mineral page. Scientists read shifts in those pages to hear when seasons turned harsh. Across the Maya lowlands, multiple records point to clusters of severe, repeated droughts in the late 8th and 9th centuries. Not one dry spell, but many. Not a single failed harvest, but whole sequences of thin years. In a world where maize was life, rain was more than weather. It was legitimacy. Reservoirs dropped, terraces cracked, cenotes and chultans held less and then less again. A single bad year can be bridged with stores and favors. 2 stretch alliances, 3 begin to break promises. When the sky refuses long enough, people stop believing that kings can talk it into kindness. Drought did not strike equally. The northern lowlands, with different geology and access to coasts, held on longer. The southern lowlands, dense with great ritual capitals, were exposed. Water systems there were brilliant but delicate. Shallow reservoirs ringed by plazas, channels that needed maintenance, catchments that silted when hills shed their skin. Hotter, drier years meant more evaporation and less refill. What began as engineering pride became an engineering trap. Drought, however, is a stage. What actors step onto it? War. Monuments that once sang of alliances turn to boast of captures. Carved scenes parade bound lords and bleeding captives. Defensive works, ditches, walls, palisades appear around places that previously relied on distance and status for safety. Burn layers cut through palace floors, arrow points litter gateways. Epigraphers trace a quickening tempo of raids, sieges, and dynastic upsets. Conflict did not create food, it consumed it. Armies must eat. Fortifications must be built. Victories bring prisoners who must be fed or displayed. Tribute shifts hands, but drought shrinks the pot to be divided. War under scarcity changes shape. Less about conquest that unifies, more about predation that fragments. Roads, once safe for merchants, became lanes for ambush. Trade faltered. With trade went the glue of regional stability. Why then keep fighting? Because in divine kingship, success is proof of right to rule. When rains fail and granaries thin, rulers grasp for another source of legitimacy, triumph. The calendar demands festivals, the people demand food, the rival demands your borders. A victory buys time, a defeat shortens the dynasty's clock. In such a world, restraint is a luxury few courts could afford. Another actor, the forest. The classic cities ate trees. They ate them for lime, to skin palaces with white plaster, for beams and scaffolds, for fires that cooked meals for swelling populations. Milpa fields opened with slash and burn could recover when fallows were long. But near capitals, fallows shortened. Hillside soils thinned and washed. Less canopy meant hotter ground and less local moisture cycling. In bad years, streams ran muddier and shorter. Silt crept into reservoirs, tightening water budgets just when they needed slack. Environmental strain hides behind success. A great plaza shines because wood burned. A stealer stands because someone cut a path to haul it. Multiply that pride by centuries and dozens of cities, and you begin to see the quiet arithmetic. The landscape supported splendor until it was asked to support too much. Then there is the matter of rulers and their choices. Elites are not villains in this story, they are human. Their power rested on ritual timing, public works, and visible generosity. When stress mounted, many chose to amplify the very strategies that had once worked. Build bigger, stage grander ceremonies, carve more history onto stone, demand more tribute to fund it all and more labor to move it. But spectacle does not refill reservoirs, and plaster does not grow maize. The top-heavy brilliance of late monuments looks, in hindsight, like a ladder leaned against a weakening wall. Fragmentation followed. Vassals shrugged off overlords. Dynasties failed without clean succession. New kings claimed thrones with thinner bases of support. Some courts tried reforms, opening new fields, digging new tanks, marrying rivals. Others gambled on conquest. The map became a patchwork of experiments without the coordination to share successes fast enough to matter. What about disease? Evidence is softer here. Bones tell stories, but not all of them. Epidemics can travel along the same routes as trade and war, and hunger sharpens their teeth. Even without a single great plague, malnutrition magnifies ordinary sickness. Mothers wean earlier when food is scarce. Children grow shorter. Communities weakened by shortages accept risks they would once refuse. Disease may have walked beside the other actors, not as the star, but as a shadow that made every loss heavier. And trade itself, obsidian, jade, cacao, shells, salt, was oxygen for the political lungs of great courts. Craft specialists depended on consistent flows. Merchants needed safe corridors and stable prices. Drought and war cut roads and spiked costs. When luxury exchange stutters, elite households lose the materials for gifts and debts. When salt caravans slow, ordinary households pay more for the basic mineral that keeps bodies balanced. Economic stress does not only bruise prestige, it empties kitchens. Pull back, and the theories stop competing and start interlocking. Drought tightens harvests and lowers reservoirs. Environmental strain removes the cushions, healthy soils, thick forests that make bad years survivable. Elites, pressed to perform prosperity, intensify building and ritual, which demand more resources from thinner margins. Warfare surges as rulers seek legitimacy and seize weakened neighbors, and the surge further disrupts trade. Trade falters, removing the lubricant that lets diverse city-states specialize without starving. Communities migrate, first the rural, then the urban, seeking steadier rain and safer ground. The result on stone is a slow quieting. Fewer monuments, shorter texts, dates that cluster and then cease. The result in households is a set of choices that look ordinary: move where cousins have land, marry into a town with a reliable spring, hire out to a coastal center, take knowledge and gods along. None of these forces alone explains the wide pattern. Together, they explain why the collapse was not a single crash, but a rolling hush that moved across the map. They explain why southern capitals went dim, while northern centers later glowed. They explain how a city system could fail, while the civilization reconfigured itself and lived on. This is the power and the limit of theories. Each catches one face of the storm. Drought names the sky, warfare names politics, environment names the ground, elite overreach names the choices leaders made when every option was bad. Trade disruption names the arteries that clotted. What matters is how they braid. So we leave this chapter with an image. A reservoir at dusk. Water lower than last year. Silt braiding the edges. Children running along a cracked margin that used to be shoreline. A scribe sharpening his tool to carve a date he hopes will sound like confidence. A patrol on the road because the next valley blames you for their hunger. A forester counting trees and counting fires. None of them sees collapse. Each sees next week. In Chapter 3, we stop treating the theories as rivals and watch how they cascade, how a dry sky forces hard choices, how hard choices drive conflict, how conflict breaks trade, how broken trade starves cities of both food and meaning, how the drumbeats slow, not because a people vanish, but because the stage they built can no longer hold the play. For now, keep the cast in mind. Sky, soil, forest, water, power, roads. They will meet again in the storm that silenced the plazas, and in the choices that let the Maya continue beyond them. Chapter 3. The Perfect Storm. The theories don't compete here. They lock together like gears. A dry sky turns slow. Reservoirs draw down. Silt creeps in at the edges. The margin for error, thin to begin with, shrinks. Every effort to fix one problem grinds another. When rains falter, the waterworks must work harder. Channels that were fine at normal flow need clearing. Step tanks need scraping. Terraces need shoring. Labor moves from fields to infrastructure at the exact moment fields are hungry for hands. Yields fall, budgets tighten, tribute schedules carved in good years suddenly feel like punishments. Palaces answer with spectacle because spectacle used to work. A king dedicates a gleaming stairway skinned in fresh lime to signal order. The crowd cheers, fear loosens. Yet the plaster was cooked with wood that might have sheltered a fallow. The labor came from plots that now grow weeds. The feast burned maize that should have filled the storehouse. One public success, borrowed from tomorrow. Scarcity travels fast. Artisans depend on steady rations and steady orders. When granaries thin, rations wobble first at the edges. Potters, carvers, porters, scribes, workshops cut hours. Apprentices drift back to farms. Quality slips. Elites, seeing prestige goods decline, reach farther for imports. Obsidian from the highlands, shells and salt from the coasts. Merchants take the roads until the roads feel unsafe. War arrives less as glory and more as logic. A rival smells weakness or claims a ritual slight. Fortifications rise, ditches and palisades that demand timber and time. Armies must eat before they fight. To pay for defense, courts squeeze tribute. Villages hold back, quietly at first, then openly. A raid answers a raid. Ambush replaces diplomacy. The quiet arteries of trade begin to clot. Without trade, specialized cities lose breath. Obsidian carvers idle. Jade polishers wait for stone that never comes. Cacao traders stare at silent roads. Gifts at court shrink. Feasts thin. Legitimacy, long braided from generosity, spectacle, and victory, phrase strand by strand. Picture a year in such a court. The reservoir sits one hand lower than last planting. Kilns have chewed a bald ring through the nearby wood. Crews patch a collapsed terrace that once fed 3 neighborhoods. Scouts return with news of a burned hamlet. The high priest argues for a larger dedication to coax the sky. The steward argues there is not enough maize for both festival and work crews. The king chooses spectacle because crowds understand spectacle, because rivals respect spectacle, because last time it bought a season of peace. That choice lands in kitchens. A mother stretches gruel. An uncle joins a work gang for extra rations and returns with less than promised. A son moves toward the coast, following stories of cousins who found steadier rain. None of this looks like collapse. It looks like practical steps in a tight year. But practical steps, multiplied across thousands of households, move entire cities. Environmental strain amplifies every note. Hills cut too often refuse to hold water. The missing canopy turns midday heat cruel in the fields, and reservoirs lose inches to the sun. Silt slips from slopes into tanks and settles as if it had always belonged there. Capacity falls just as demand climbs. Clearing silt requires crews and baskets and time. Time requires food. Food requires rain. The loop closes tighter each season. Some courts grab new levers. Fresh fields are opened in marginal soils. Those plots pay for a year or 3 and then bite back with exhaustion. Others pivot to diplomacy. Marriage alliances, shared festivals, trade pacts. Diplomacy is brittle when hunger is near. A single late caravan undoes a month of courtesies. A single insult, or the rumor of one, sparks a border clash that costs the grain you meant to share. Meanwhile, the writing slows. Scribes who once etched long histories now carve short declarations, more often about war than building. The last dates in the south cluster, like anxious breaths. Stelae stop, not because memory lost value, but because the institutions that minted memory, prosperous courts, confident dynasties, lost their fuel. Migration becomes the quiet engine of the storm. Families navigate like water, following channels unseen on royal maps. Some slide to river margins. Others join cousins in the north. Still others hug the coast where salt and fish, blunt market swings. When households leave, they carry more than pottery. They take techniques, gods, stories, marriage ties. Workshops empty first. Grand plazas last. The silence in capitals arrives late, and when it arrives, it feels sudden. Across the map, a pattern emerges. Southern capitals, heavy with monuments, and dependent on rainfall trapped in shallow basins. Dim first. Northern centers, built on different geology and plugged into sea lanes, hold on, adapt, or rise. The civilization reroutes around broken links, not a light switched off, but a grid reconfigured under stress. Keep the human scale in view. Priests argue calendars as if the sky might be persuaded. Farmers watch ants for weather signs because the temple forecasts have grown unreliable. Children play on the exposed ledge of a reservoir that used to lie underwater by a man's height. A mason runs his hand along an unfinished stair and knows there will be no final coat. The kiln crews never came back. To call it collapse is true and incomplete. Systems collapse, people adapt. The perfect storm is not a mystery wind. It is a set of pressures that align. Dry sky, thin soil, felled forest, heavy palace, sharp spear, empty road. Each alone is survivable. Together, they set timers inside cities that no festival can unwind. The lesson is plain. Resilience lives in buffers, food stores, healthy woods, flexible trade, leaders willing to cut spectacle before they cut rations. When those buffers are spent, a society still looks strong right up to the moment it isn't. Strength without slack is only poise. By the end of this chapter, the storm has done its work. Plazas are tended less. Drums beat fewer nights. The last long texts taper off. Migrants thread north and east, carrying a world inside them. The jungle, patient and opportunistic, tries the doors and finds many unlocked. Next, we follow those people into places where rain still gathers, where markets recover, where old gods meet new cities. The cities fell. The Maya continued. In that difference lies the meaning of the storm and the mirror it holds up to us.
Chapter 4: Echoes and Resilience, a Civilization Reimagined. The plazas fell quiet, but the footsteps did not. Families left brittle capitals with seeds wrapped in cloth, grindstones slung on backs, and the grammar of a world carried in memory. What followed was not an ending so much as a rearrangement, cities shifting, trade rerouting, ritual learning to breathe beneath different roofs. North of the worst drought belts, new lights appeared. Chichen Itza drew power from roads and sea lanes, its markets humming with salt, cotton, cacao, copper bells, and bright feathers. Along the stony Pook Hills, towns stitched elaborate mosaic facades and cut bottle-shaped cisterns into limestone to bank water through dry months. The strategy was practical: diversify lifelines. If rain failed inland, ports could steady prices. If a road felt unsafe, a canoe could carry the load at dawn. Coastal towns tied the peninsula into a net. Canoe caravans hugged lagoons and reefs, moving salt, fish, honey, and dyes between islands and river mouths. The sea did not care who held the old capitals. It rewarded anyone who could navigate wind, reef, and promise. Inland, smaller centers thrived by being nimble. Less marble, more grain, fewer monuments, more wells. Prestige shifted from stone height to network reach. Ritual adapted as quickly as trade. Daykeepers still counted sacred cycles. Festivals still bound community to sky. Gods wore new jewelry but kept old names. Courts that once poured wealth into stairways now spent on markets, piers, and walls. Kingship did not vanish, it changed sets. Confederations rose and fell. Councils balanced dynasts. Tribute blended with tariffs. Power experimented because survival demanded it. Through it all, the pulse of daily life remained intelligible. Milpa agriculture, maize, beans, and squash, continued as a wisdom art, not a relic. Long fallows healed soil, tree crops softened bad seasons, forest patches doubled as pharmacy, pantry, and shade. Grand strategy emerges from humble rules. Spread risk, bank water, mix crops, listen to elders, move when the land says move. Language carried this operating system forward. Dozens of Maya languages evolved and diverged, yet shared roots bound them like branches of one ceiba. Words for rain, kin, maize, and debt retained sharp edges. Poetry survived in oral epics and later in texts written with borrowed alphabets. The Popol Vuh, remembered, recited, finally inked, spoke of people formed from maize dough, a truth more nourishing than any dynasty's boast. Centuries later, strangers arrived by sail and steel. The story bent again. New diseases cut deeper than any drought. New tribute demands bit harder than the old. Communities retreated into forests and highlands, then returned to trade, plant, and weave. Towns learned the rhythms of colonial markets while guarding older calendars at the hearth. Resistance, compromise, renewal. The cycle did not begin in the classic era, and it did not end with conquest. Today, millions of Maya live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Markets open under awnings of blue tarp. Corn grinds on stones smooth as riverbeds. Children slip between school Spanish and a grandmother's tongue. Textiles encode lineages. Dances retell wars and harvests. Healers mix herbs in courtyards the way astronomers once mixed numbers. The civilization never stepped outside history. It wrote new chapters inside it. What then do the quiet plazas teach? Those terraces under vines, those reservoirs holding the sky like a dim mirror. First, buffers are not luxuries. Food stores, healthy forests, flexible trade, and diversified economies are the ribs that keep a society breathing when climate swings. Budgets that cut these first are spending the future. Second, prestige must serve resilience. Monument projects are easy to photograph and applaud. Soil health, water maintenance, and local clinics are slow miracles. Leaders earn lasting legitimacy by protecting buffers before polishing symbols. Third, decentralized coordination beats isolated greatness. A patchwork of strong towns linked by honest roads survives shocks better than one dazzling capital pulling every resource into its shadow. Information must move quickly. Help must cross borders without tribute attached. Fourth, memory is infrastructure. Stories of thin years, rituals for water, planting calendars, names for winds. These are tools. When a culture forgets how it survived the last storm, it borrows against the next one.
These are not museum slogans. They are policies disguised as proverbs. They explain why the city system failed, yet the people continued. They show how a civilization can change shape and still recognize itself in the mirror. Look again at an emptied classic plaza. It is not failure frozen, it is compost. Vines climb where banners once hung. Birds nest where conch shells once opened markets. That green is warning and comfort at once. Warning because complexity without slack tumbles no matter how glorious. Comfort because people are better at surviving than our monuments are at standing. We close where we began, with silence that is not absence. The Maya cities fell in a storm of drought, war, and overreach, but the people turned, split, braided, and walked forward. They altered their maps, updated their contracts with land and sky, and kept the thread of identity unbroken. That is not a mystery. It is a craft. If this story changed how you see the past, carry its working parts into the present. Plant buffers, steward water, design redundancy, reward leaders who cut spectacle before they cut grain. Picture success that looks less like height and more like spread, less like a single drumbeat and more like many rhythms in time. The stones keep their secrets, but they also keep our reflection. When you pass a fallen stair, see the risk of narrow glory and the power of quiet repair. When you hear a joke travel from elder to child in a Maya market, hear a civilization practicing endurance in real time. The drums that once shook those old plazas have faded. New rhythms rise, markets at dawn, hand looms at noon, rain on corrugated roofs at night. The Maya did not vanish. They are cooking, teaching, bargaining, praying. A civilization reimagined itself and kept going. In that persistence is the final meaning of the silence, not the end of a people, but the end of a pattern. And beyond it, the sound of many paths, braiding into a future, ready for weather yet to come. The stones are quiet, but the people never were. The Maya didn't vanish, the cities did, and that changes how we read the past and how we plan our future. If this journey shifted the way you see history, tap like so more people find it. Tell me in the comments what surprised you most and what you want next. Silk Road Secrets, Cleopatra versus Rome, or Rome's Mad Emperors. Your pick becomes our next deep dive. Subscribe and ring the bell so the premiere finds you first. Share this with someone who still thinks the Maya disappeared. Let's retire that myth for good. Want more tonight? Watch Genghis Khan, Rise and Fall of the Mongol Empire on the end screen. Then come back and tell me what connection you see between empires that rise fast and cities that fall slow. Resilience lives in buffers. Prestige should serve survival. Silence is not absence. I'm Kevin from Echoes of History. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.